Our next speaker is Professor David Stroll. And David is one of the few people I've spoken to whilst we've been working on this event who could actually tell me what was going on in the 1980s with real first-hand experience. So he's got a huge amount of experience in this area. He was previously CEO of Inbuilt Consulting. He was director of Enesco. But tonight he's going to talk to us about some pioneering work he did with the Royal Mail in drawing up their MACC curves. And I think it's an interesting follow-on from Marcel, who said, you know, maybe the MACC curve is a tool whose time has come. We now talk to somebody who's used it in a very pioneering way. So, David, over to you.
Well, thank you, Jim. Evening, ladies and gentlemen. Can I have the clicker? Thanks. Yes, I'm going to talk about trying to apply MACC curves at individual buildings or to a stock of very large buildings. In this case, the case study I'll use is based upon some work I did last year for the Royal Mail Group. But before I get into the specifics of the Royal Mail project, I just thought it might be useful to run through a few of the pros and cons, because, as you've just heard from Marcelo, the marginal abatement cost curves really have their origins in macroeconomic carbon planning and are a very powerful tool in that way, in that sense. And although they do have their detractors, they clearly have an important role to play. If you, though, try to use the same approach associated with trying to identify and then quantify carbon abatement from individual energy efficiency measures applied to buildings, there are some pros and cons. So if we talk about the pros, first of all, it does provide an incredibly powerful visual summary of the main opportunities, where clearly anything that falls on the bottom left of a MACC curve, by definition, is worthy of further consideration from an investment perspective. And the beauty, of course, over simple payback is that you're not only looking, getting a representation of the pounds per tonne of carbon or CO2 saved, but also the quantum of carbon saved as well. So very powerful and much more effective than simple payback times. And as Jim says, yes, to my going back into my past, I was involved in doing energy audits and surveys and so on. Long time ago, and inevitably we always presented the findings in terms of simple payback, and inevitably investments didn't get made because they just simply, it wasn't a very engaging way of doing it. So it is much more compelling and much more engaging from a CFO perspective. And as I say, those measures with a negative abatement cost become immediately apparent. And there are now a range of software tools available to generate MACC curves. The Carbon Trust has a MACC curve generator that can be downloaded from their website. But they do still require a detailed energy audit. These are not a shortcut. You know, they're not an answer. You can't just simply generate a sort of generic MACC curve and expect it to be valuable and useful. So, most or nearly all energy efficiency measures are very site and context specific, and what might be appropriate, for instance, in a supermarket may well not be appropriate in a hotel. So this is not a shortcut in any way at all. So reliable estimates of installed cost are still needed, and also robust estimates of the energy efficiency or carbon saving attributable to the measures must still be produced, and that's a skilled job. And it's still a case of garbage in and garbage out, I'm afraid. So yes, you can produce MACC curves at the building level, but if you don't get those two other elements right in terms of a robust estimate of the saving and the cost, well, the MACC curve's going to be pretty meaningless. So it is a case of buyer beware. Don't necessarily believe what you see on a MACC curve if it's presented to you by a potential equipment supplier. And the other thing which is really important to say, and that is that if you look at any MACC curve, you will see, as Marcel showed, a list of possible interventions or measures. Some of those are antagonistic with each other, and some of them are synergistic, and indeed some are substitutional. So, you know, if you adopt the measure related, this is a very simple example, related to installing or upgrading the insulation in a building, the saving, the carbon abatement saving you would get by adopting the measure related to improving, say, boiler efficiency will be reduced as a consequence. So they're not cumulative. Very often, as quite often indicated on a MACC curve, they're not necessarily quite as attractive as that whole horizontal axis might suggest. So understanding these key conflicts is really critical, because you can make some very bad investment decisions if you just work along that bottom axis, picking off the, you know, cherry picking what seem to be the main winners. It is still a skilled job. So individual MACC curves do need to be applied with caution and intelligence. Now, what we did do is pilot this approach on a range of Royal Mail buildings. As you can imagine, Royal Mail have an extremely large stock of buildings, varying in size and age, from small Victorian sorting offices, local distribution centres, big mail centres, very large, highly automated, modern buildings as well, with 2 or 3 megawatts of sorting machinery inside them. So very, very diverse range of building types. And of course, it does then beg the question for a large building stock owner of that sort, and that is where best to focus the effort. So the instigator of this project is a guy called Dr. Martin Blake, who got me involved, and Utilix, and the company that I used to run, Inbuilt and Utilix, jointly undertook this project for Royal Mail. The objective of the work was to provide Royal Mail with a framework, really, that allowed a more intelligent way of assessing the carbon-saving investment opportunities across their stock of buildings. As I said, this was a joint project undertaken by Utilix and Inbuilt. The methodology the approach we adopted was to try to categorize the building stock to determine whether the good old 80-20 rule applied, which indeed it did. We found that 80% roughly of their carbon, the carbon attributable to their building stock, occurred in about 20% of the building. So we then focused in our effort on those ones. And Utilix produced a MACC tool which allowed then various things to be modelled. Now, I haven't got time, unfortunately, to go into this in detail at the moment, but what we were looking at clearly was not only a very extensive range of potential interventions and measures, and we went into it initially trying to, without any preconceptions in terms of where things would fall out on the MACC curve. So we went right back to basics, had a very, very long list of potential measures. And this is the sort of MACC curve that was generated from that. Royal Mail are not keen for me to identify what the individual interventions and measures are, because they don't want to be harassed by by dozens of companies trying to flog them particular technologies. But you can see that there are a very broad range of potential interventions along this axis here. But as I say, there is this health warning, though, in terms of they're not all cumulative, and some indeed are substitutional. I've been given the 1-minute sign, so I'm afraid I'll have to canter through this fairly quickly. But in a nutshell, what this tool allows is a whole raft of different scenarios to be considered and assessed very quickly and very effectively. So it is an extremely powerful tool in many ways. An interesting extension of this work, now this is not for Royal Mail, this is actually for a petrochem plant, but derived from work by Booz & Co., is to actually flip what appears on the bottom left axis of a MACC curve and in essence generate an investment returns curve, which then on this axis you have in a logarithmic scale the rate of return, the internal rate of return that a combination of measures will give you, and then depending on what the investment criteria is in a particular organisation, you can actually see where the cut-off comes, and it is a very powerful extension of a MACC curve and something that I think we'll see much more of going forward. So key conclusions, they can be a very effective way and be very effective at the site level, but accurate data is still required. There's no shortcuts here, though, I'm afraid. I wish I could say there was. You still have to do a detailed site energy audit to get at the key site-specific opportunities. The costs of getting that data in a sufficiently accurate form can be high, and it requires, to achieve this accurate estimate of installed cost and energy-saving measures. Clearly, you've got then the opportunity to plug in organisation-specific financial assumptions, and then you can play tunes with those in the software very effectively. So it does provide a very powerful and effective way of quickly comparing different scenarios, including obviously future energy price increases or the impact of future cost of carbon compliance. But in the end, you know, but don't forget the good old GIGO, and that is make sure that what you're putting in isn't garbage, because you will get garbage out. Many thanks.
Thank you very much, David. And I didn't know you could play tunes on a MACC curve, so there we are. And I think what was very interesting there was the evolution from a MACC curve to an investment returns curve, which, you know, MACCs are always evolving.